Want to know why? Ask how. Howard the Humongous. Keep your eyes peeled on a pattern that may be emerging with Vladimir Putin's inching toward additional land empire. Vladimir Putin's allies. Vladimir Putin feels that NATO is his enemy. NATO is a big alliance. It includes the United States and most of the European countries. It's a military alliance in which every single country is pledged to defend the other militarily if there is some form of military attack. It is a threatening alliance to somebody who's outside of it. Vladimir Putin is not just outside of it, he considers himself to be its enemy, or it to be his enemy. He considers that the current crisis is caused by NATO overreaching, and there's a certain validity to his assumption. Meanwhile, Vladimir Putin has his own alliance, his own NATO, and it consists of China, Russia, Iran, and Syria. If you're puzzled about why Vladimir Putin is so involved in Syria and Iran, they're his military allies. They are his source of an alliance, a bloc that can face down NATO. But Iran, ever since the Iranian Revolution of 1979, has had an unusual strategy of conquest. Some people responding to Howard the Humongous videos about Iran have said, well, Iran has never sent troops into a country like Afghanistan or Iraq. America is the only imperialist. No, I'm sorry. Iran is an imperialist too, but it doesn't send its troops in. Instead, it maintains proxy armies. Armies it can claim are indigenous to the countries in which they operate. Armies which it can claim are not its armies at all. It has roughly 5 of those proxy armies. It has Hezbollah in Lebanon. It has Hamas in the Gaza Strip. It has several armies in, at least 2 armies in Iraq. One operates as a militia under a mullah, a religious head, who in reality can be called back to Iran anytime because he's operating on Iranian orders. And the other is a group of Iraqis who there was an 8-year war from 1981 to 1988 between Iraq and Iran, in which Iran tried to topple Saddam Hussein and failed. It cost 1 million lives. It cost $1 trillion. Many of the Iraqis were not happy with Saddam Hussein and went over to Iran's side. There were at least 50,000 of them. And that force of Iraqis who have been allied with the Iranians and were allied with the Iranians through an 8-year painful war is still alive as a proxy army in Iraq today. This is why Iran controls Iraq, why Iraq has become basically an Iranian satellite state, thanks to the United States, thanks to the fact that we toppled Saddam Hussein. The point is that Iran operates through proxy armies. It does not send its own troops into a foreign country, maybe a few advisors, but that's about it. It sends a lot of ammunition, a lot of rockets in particular, 40,000 rockets at a time in the case of Hezbollah. And then there's China. China has a military strategy of a kind we're unaccustomed to. We think of imperialism as the kind of imperialism that Europe was responsible for in the 19th century, and that was gunboat imperialism. That was sending your ships off to a distant land. China is an empire. China is an empire that has been growing inch by inch over the course of 2,200 years since the Han unified China as one empire. And it proceeds but the way an amoeba proceeds. An amoeba stretches out what's called a pseudopod. It stretches out what looks like a limb, and it engulfs something else, another little creature. And then it slowly builds a bubble around that little creature and hauls that little creature deep inside of itself and takes it apart with digestive juices, chemically dissolves it. China does the same kind of thing. It did that, for example, between 1948 and 1952 with a country called Tibet, a sovereign country. And it has sent army after army, wave after wave of Han immigrants, of Chinese immigrants into Tibet to de-Tibetanize Tibet and to Hanize, to Chineseize the Tibetan civilization. It wants to do that with Taiwan, even though Taiwan is one of the strongest economic powers on the face of Earth today, a tremendous power in electronics. One way or the other, what Russia has on its hands is the example of a state that expands by tiny little increments on its borders in China. And it has an example in its other ally, Iran, of a nation that builds proxy armies. What has Vladimir Putin done to win Crimea and possibly several other pieces of the eastern Ukraine? He has used proxy armies, heavily riddled with Russian arms, with some Russians helping to lead them. And he has used the policy of spreading out, putting a pseudopod out on his immediate borders, and then engulfing something on his immediate periphery, the Chinese strategy. Watch Vladimir Putin. His strategies are not the strategies of imperialist England in the 19th century. His strategies are the strategies of imperialist China over 2,200 years and of the modern Iranian revolutionary state, which also was one of the biggest empires in the history of the world and has been so at various times over the course of the last 2,600 years, 2,600 years. Vladimir Putin is not using our strategy. This is Howard the Humongous speaking to you from the future. It's your job and my job to make, or want to know why? Ask how. And now for my incompetence with the infamous off button. I've got it.